Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves have about the worst defense in the league when Rudy Gobert is off the floor. We'll talk about the Rudy on-off stuff, the Jaylen Clark on-off stuff, and more. It's all coming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Happy Timberwolves game day, and happy opening day of NBA Cup because it's the Cup, right? We're excited about the start of the NBA Cup. It does start tonight. Wolves Jazz is the first game of the NBA Cup for Minnesota and for Utah. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll preview the matchup. A couple of old friends on that Utah team, Kevin Love, Kyle Anderson. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about the matchup toward the end of the show. But I want to start with some Rudy Gobert stuff and some lineup data, which is obviously still a small sample. We're now basically 10% of the way through the season, as crazy as that is. We'll talk about what we know so far about how bad the Timberwolves are, especially defensively, but really on both ends of the floor. And Rudy Gobert is off the floor. I also want to talk about the Jaylen Clark impact, which he's missed a couple of games, so that sample's even smaller. But what those lineups look like, and then we'll dig in a bit on the third quarter issues that the Timberwolves are having so far this season. They got crushed in the third quarter in a couple of each of their recent losses, or their two most recent losses, especially this last time out on Wednesday night against the Knicks. So we'll break all that down before we get to the Jazz preview. That's all coming in just a moment. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. Let's talk Rudy Gobert. So there's all kinds of stats floating around out there on Twitter, on X. Like how if you extrapolated over an entire season, the Gobert on or the Gobert off numbers, it'd be like the worst defense ever, basically. That's true, 100%. And I guess that's a good place to start. I mean, there's a lot of numbers you can look at. The straight on-off numbers, according to Cleaning the Glass, have Rudy as a plus 26.1, which is a 95th percentile. Let's see, what's the exact definition? 95th percentile in terms of team points scored per 100 possessions, the net rating, effectively, right? 95th percentile, plus 26.1. For the record, the only three Timberwolves that are dramatically above, dramatically is not the right word. We'll say this. There's 5 Timberwolves players that are at or above the 50th percentile for differential for on-off. It's Gobert at 95th percentile, Conley at 71st percentile, plus 9.2, DiVincenzo 66th, and then Jaden is at 52nd percentile, and Julius Randle's at the 50th. Naz Reid, Anthony Edwards, TJ Shannon are all well below the 50th percentile. And there's a bunch of guys who don't factor in because they haven't played 100 possessions yet. And Jaylen Clark, who we'll talk about, is the one that's performed the best of all those guys that have not yet played 100 possessions. He's played 97, so he's close. The defensive numbers, when Gobert is on the floor, the Timberwolves are a 100th percentile defense. They give up minus 32.9 points allowed per 100 possessions played, which obviously doesn't mean they give it negative points, but that's against the league average, right? So 100th percentile defensively when Gobert is on the floor. Or I should say 100 percentile difference. So the minus 32.9 is the differential between when he's on and off the floor. So they're essentially 33 points better per 100 possessions, which is crazy when Gobert is on the floor. That's a crazy number. Now, on-off's helpful because I mean, for obvious reasons, but the one issue I have with it is it's a bit noisier than straight lineup data because it also takes into account, it also factors in essentially just how bad or how good the team is without you, right? Instead of just strictly that player's impact. So, the on-off with Rudy stuff, when he's on the floor, obviously it helps measure his impact, but it also shows when he's off the floor, yes, he's really impactful, but just how bad the non-Rudy bigs are for Minnesota defensively. And I think both are true. Like, to be clear, I think Rudy Gobert is playing really well so far this season overall. And I said this the other day, and I would classify the Knicks game as kind of a middle-of-the-road performance for him. but I had said, I forget on which show, maybe it was Wednesday's show, that I felt like Rudy to that point had like 2 really good games, 2 really bad games, and 2 or 3 middle of the pack games. And now we've played 8 games, and it's probably still about that same breakdown, right? It's probably like 3 middle of the pack games, maybe 4 middle of the pack games, 2 really good games and 2 really bad games. Overall, like in the context of the season, Gobert's been really impactful defensively through 8 games, certainly. But he hasn't been like all defensive. He hasn't been defensive player of the year impactful to the they don't have like the league's best defense when he's on the floor quite, but they are 100th percentile in terms of on off because they're that bad when Gobert's off the floor. And that's specifically Nasri, Julius, Randle, but they're not the only ones because there's 3 or 4 other guys on the floor. So I like looking at the actual lineup data with and without Rudy Gobert because that gives us a little bit more information about like when Gobert's off the floor, who's to blame in terms of playing the 4 and the 5. When he's on the floor, how successful are those lineups and who's in those lineups? So when Gobert's on the floor, the Timberwolves have a 78th percentile unit overall, or I should say lineup overall, a plus 7.5. Defensively, they're 79th percentile. So again, they're not a 100th percentile defense when Gobert's on the floor. So it's not like he's been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Rudy. He's been really good, but the on-off just shows us how bad everyone else has been, as well as Rudy being good. Okay, so with Rudy, they're a 79th percentile defense, not a 100th percentile defense. Offensively with Rudy, they're a 63rd percentile offense, so above league average, not set the world on fire, but fine. So overall, they're a 78th percentile team with a plus 7.5 net rating when Rudy Gobert is on the floor. Okay. Obviously, the lineup he's played with the most is the starters minus Ant plus Conley because of the games that Ant missed. And that lineup's actually been really good. Now, the caveat here, and this is what we have to do with these really small sample sizes still so early in the season, remember the teams that the Timberwolves played without Anthony Edwards. Yes, there was the dud against the shorthanded Lakers, but then they blew out a bad Hornets team and they blew out a bad Nets team. Those are the 3 teams they played. Oh, and they also lost to the Nuggets. That was a relatively close game. They ended up losing by 13, but like they hung around in that one. So what they went 2-2 without Ant, 2 blowout wins, a close loss, and a kind of medium loss. So perhaps not surprising that the Conley, DiVincenzo, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert lineups were good. They were plus 22, which obviously, again, small sample. That's why that number looks so good. It's actually just an 86th percentile unit because we're still so early in the season. But they played 137 possessions together. In fact, about a quarter of the Timberwolves' possessions to this point in the season were played by that lineup, the starters minus Ant plus Conley. And it's been a good lineup. And offensively, they've been a 90th percentile unit, as weird as that is. And we talked about it on Wednesday before Ant came back, the ball movement stuff, the frequency. And I think I forgot to cite this, but Jace Frederick had a great stat on Twitter from the Jace from the Pioneer Press about the number of passes when it was healthy versus injured. And I haven't looked at the data from the most recent game when Ant came back against the Knicks, but coming into that game, they moved the ball a lot better when Ant was off the floor. And that I could have told you that. The eye test tells you that, right? I'm not about to make, the Simmons Ewing theory argument here that the Wolves are like better without Ant or anything like that. But the offense to this point in the season was better without Ant because the ball movement was better. The caveat being they played half of those games against Brooklyn and Charlotte, and they were all high scoring games because the defense wasn't great. Like, all these things are true, but the fact of the matter is the offense was good and that there were 90th percentile offense without Ant on the floor. And yes, that included Gobert on the floor. So overall, again, back to the Gobert point, plus 7.5 net rating with Gobert on the floor, 78th percentile in terms of that unit. I want to look at the defense, or excuse me, I want to look at the lineups with, well, yes, the defense too, with Gobert off the floor. Who are the primary culprits that lead to this 100th percentile differential or 100th percentile on off for Rudy Gobert? Because the defense has been just horrific without Rudy Gobert. I want to dig in on those lineups a little bit. We'll get into the third quarter struggles. We'll talk a little Jaylen Clark. We'll close with Wolves Jazz. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at DoorDash. The NBA season's heating up. We're 3 weeks in now, and DoorDash has found the perfect way to keep fans in their bag all season long. Whether you're watching for the highlights, your fantasy team, or maybe your favorite player or favorite team like the Timberwolves, DoorDash makes every game night even better. DoorDash is the official on-demand delivery platform of the NBA, and they are celebrating with something called the bag drop. Every time an NBA player scores 50 points in a game, which has happened a few times already. In fact, we're about to see Lauri Markkanen. He did that already. DoorDash drops 50% off your order with Dash Pass the next day, and you're automatically entered for a chance to win the ultimate fan bag. We're talking player-inspired drip, exclusive gear, and stuff that you'll actually want. Plus, Reiner, on DoorDash, you don't have to just get food. You can get anything: snacks, drinks, headphones, ice, even socks, whatever you need. You can get it delivered. DoorDash has you covered for your late night highlights, your last minute watch parties, and even double OT fuel ups. So next time someone goes off for 50, use promo code NBA50 the next day to get 50% off on DoorDash with Dash Pass, plus your shot at the bag drop. Dash Pass members only, 50% off up to $10 the day after a 50-point game with promo code. Terms apply. No purchase necessary. Ends April 13th. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Visit DoorDashInYourBag.com for full details. DoorDash, in your bag all season long. All right, let's finish the Rudy conversation here. We talked about the lineups with him, 78th percentile. Great. Lineups without Rudy are 3rd percentile overall, minus 18.6 net rating. Get this. Perhaps unsurprisingly, without Rudy on the floor, the Timberwolves are a zero percentile defense, 143.3 points per 100 possessions. Think about that. I mean, you break that down to points per possession. That's easy. It's what? Almost a 1.5 per possession, which is absolutely insane. A 1.5 per possession is crazy. And that's basically what these lineups are without Rudy. The offense, on the other hand, is a 96th percentile unit. Almost 125 points per 100 possessions. So they're giving up, again, we could do the per possession thing. They give up 1.43 points per possession, and they get 1.25 points per possession with Rudy off the floor, which of course ends up being a really bad differential over the course of, you extrapolate that out, it's bad for Minnesota. You're losing by almost a quarter point per possession. But the offense has been bad, or excuse me, been good with Rudy off the floor. The defense has been horrific. The top used no Rudy lineups are Conley, Jaylen Clark, McDaniels, Randle, and Naz Reid. Then tied for the most used. There's a bunch that have like between 10 and 18 possessions together. The next most is Conley, Edwards, Clark, Shannon, and Naz Reid. So very different lineups. Both have been kind of the same in terms of bad on offense, horrific on defense. Now, the good offensive lineups, or I'm sorry, those were actually good, decent on offense. The best offensive lineup has actually been a little bit better defensively, and I think this is an intriguing one, and the one I want to really key in on. It's the starters minus Ant and Rudy plus Naz. So it's Mike Conley, Dante DiVincenzo, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Naz Reid. They've only played 15 possessions together, which surprises me a little bit, but I guess that would be basically when Ant was hurt and Rudy is off the floor. They're a plus 72.4 differential in those 15 possessions. Painfully small sample size. I get it. But given how bad all these other lineups are, like every other lineup is a huge negative that's played any semblance of time together without Rudy. This one at least is competitive defensively, just 114 points per 100 possessions, and they're astronomically great offensively, nearly 2 points per possession. It's probably due to sample size, and it probably came against Charlotte and Brooklyn. And that's, again, going back to that same caveat. But I think, given how bad the non-Rudy lineups have been otherwise, it's something you got to play into more. And, of course, they're about to play another bad team in Utah, which we'll talk about later. But you got to play who's in front of you. You got to beat who's in front of you. And I would like to see the Conley, DiVincenzo, McDaniels, Randle, Reid lineups get more run. And I think the reason we haven't seen more of it is because of the natural substitution pattern when everybody's healthy and available means Ant is usually on the floor instead of Conley with this lineup, right? Because the way the Wolves do the subs, Gobert leaves, Naz comes in, and then Ant leaves, but briefly, and then comes back and Conley sits again. Like the way that pattern works when Ant's healthy, assuming there's no massive foul trouble, I don't know how often we'll see that lineup, but keep that one in mind. I think it's worth playing out a bit further. The other player I think is interesting to look at is Jaylen Clark. And I say this because for a couple of reasons. One, the defense was horrendous when he wasn't available. Remember the games he missed? He missed the Pacers. No, he played in the Pacers game. That was the game Ant got hurt in. And then he missed the Nuggets and Lakers games. And I said this at the time, like, look, of course you're going to give up that many points when you're losing two of your best 3 perimeter defenders. I mean, obviously Jaden would be in that conversation as well, even though they don't want to use him at the point of attack as much this year, but it's Jaden, Ant, and it's Jaylen Clark. You're missing 2 of the 3. Of course your defense isn't going to be as good. But then the second reason I want to key in on Jaden is, as I mentioned earlier, you look at the on-off numbers. If you ignore the lack of possessions, I mean, Jaylen Clark is 3rd on the team. And he's, after this game, by the way, against Utah, Jaylen Clark will qualify for the played at least 100 possessions thing on cleaning the glass. And then he'll be number 3 on the team and on-off behind, of course, Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley, who are always the top 2. Again, on-off reflects how good the guys have played, but also how bad the guys who play in their stead have played. And Jaylen Clark has been a lot better than TJ Shannon, than Rob Dillingham, than, I mean, at this point, even than Ant. In fact, the offense has been better with Jaylen Clark than it has been with Ant. And that's the weird thing I want to key in on, actually, is you look at the Jaylen Clark lineups. When he's on the court, the Timberwolves offense is a 93rd percentile unit in 187 possessions. So obviously still a small sample, but it's not nothing. When Jaylen Clark is off the floor, when he's on the floor, the offense is a 93rd percentile unit. The defense is only 34th percentile with Jaylen Clark on the floor. And here's why I think that is. The primary reason is because 3 of the top 4 lineups that Jaylen Clark has played in don't include Rudy Gobert. So he's on the floor with Naz Reid and Julius Randle and even some lineups with TJ Shannon at the 4. And I think that's in part, again, it's just the way the substitution pattern has worked out to this point. I think it's in part because Jaylen Clark was hurt, and so there's some noise here, missed a couple of games. But I also wonder how much of it is Chris Finch going, all right, well, who are our best 3 defensive players? It's McDaniels, it's Gobert, and Clark. We need to try to have 2 of the 3 of them on the floor as much as possible. And so sometimes Clark ends up on the floor with Jaden. Sometimes he ends up on the floor with Gobert. But his second most used lineup, neither of those guys is on the floor. And those lineups are not good. Clark with Ant, Conley, Shannon, Reid. That's a miserable defensive lineup. You can hunt both Shannon and Conley with the way those guys are playing right now defensively. So I guess my point is more Jaylen Clark, number 1, because the offense has actually been good with him on the floor. I know he struggled with his shot. He finally made a 3 against the Knicks. But the numbers to this point, small sample size be damned, do not lie. Jaylen Clark has been good for the Wolves offense. And my theory there is it's a ball movement thing, right? Like he's passing the basketball. It's almost, there was that game, it was almost like a hot potato in the Brooklyn game. He caught the ball in the corner and he had just missed a 3. He was like, nope, and passed it to DiVincenzo or whoever's a better 3-point shooter. But at least he's moving the ball. He needs to be willing to shoot it. And we did see him make one in the Knicks game. So perhaps that confidence is, comes back for Jaylen Clark. But he moves the basketball. That's a big thing. And he's really good defensively. I know that I just said numbers don't lie and the defensive numbers aren't good with him on the floor, but he hasn't played enough with Rudy Gobert. In fact, I'll prove my point here. I'm doing this live, so hopefully I'm right about this, but I am right about it. I was guessing. I hadn't looked this up previously, but it popped in my head. Jaylen Clark and Rudy Gobert together, a 96th percentile defensive unit. So remember, Rudy by himself, Rudy lineups are like 70-something percent. Rudy and Jaylen together are a 96th percentile defensive unit. They're a 98th percentile offensive unit. That means they're a 99th percentile unit overall. Yes, it's only about 100 possessions, but it's a plus 22.6. So I'm here to advocate more Jaylen and Rudy together. And I know they're playing a bunch of bad teams upcoming, and it's the right time to try and get Ant going offensively. He's obviously going to get his opportunity to do that. Ant or no Ant, there needs to be a lot. This is also the right time to try the Clark and Rudy lineup, to try more Clark and Rudy lineups, because these teams are going to try and play at a faster pace. The Utahs, the Sacramentos, the other bad teams that are upcoming. I mean, Utah doesn't actually play at a very fast pace, but maybe they will now that Walker Kessler's out. But these bad teams may try and create higher variance if they're actually trying to win. In Sacramento's case, they are. In Utah's case, I don't think they are, especially without Kessler. But all that to say, it's the right time to experiment with some things. And I know the Wolves are only 4-4, but I'm not saying like experiment with Jean Beranger and Bones Highland and like a bunch of guys that we're not convinced are going to be good contributors positive contributors this year anyway. I'm saying take what we've seen work in a small sample and get a bigger sample to see if it will work moving forward against teams that you should be beating. And honestly, Clark and Gobert together against these teams could absolutely shut down these inefficient offenses, no matter how fast they want to play. So I'm asking for more Clark and Rudy together, starting with this stretch of games. And we'll talk about the schedule here upcoming, but those lineups have been good. They've been two of the best three players in terms of on-off. And by the way, the top two Rudy Clark lineups also include Mike Conley in them. And Ant's not in like any of them. In fact, Ant's only played 5 possessions with Gobert and Jaylen Clark. And they've been good for what it's worth. It's 5 possessions, but still. All right, let's talk briefly third quarter. There's actually not a whole lot to say there, but I want to talk about just how bad it's been in the third quarter for the Wolves so far. And then we'll close by talking Wolves Jazz. We'll get you ready for the game tonight. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA is back. We're 3 weeks in now. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of any given game, or maybe just want to ride the hot hand during the game, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks and more. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. So you bet on the game. You could also combine your live bets in that same game into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making a late push. Tonight, the Timberwolves are favored by 12 at home against the Jazz in the NBA Cup opener for the Wolves. That number seems a little bit high to me. I know the Jazz lost Kessler. I know that they're not good, but you look at the net rating stuff, these teams are actually pretty close. We'll talk about this in a minute. I think the Wolves will win, but I don't mind Jazz plus 12. If I'm just a completely like if I'm being objective here, and if I were to bet on this game on FanDuel, I don't mind Utah plus 12 at Minnesota tonight. Live betting games keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making a late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends at Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. If you haven't tried yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere that Prize Picks operates. Prize Picks is a ton of fun on football Sundays. Also, like Friday night in the NBA, everyone's in action tonight, I believe, because it's an NBA Cup night. Keeps every game exciting. You can pick your favorite player. You could look at Anthony Edwards and say, I think he'll hit more than, call it 3.5 threes or whatever the number is for Ant tonight. Or you might say, I think Rudy Gobert will get more than 9 rebounds because, look, he's got to after the rebounding performance against the Knicks. Plus, the great thing is this injury reboot that Prize Picks does. If one of your players leaves early with an injury, hopefully a bigger deal. I shouldn't say hopefully, maybe a bigger deal in football than in basketball. The injury reboot can save your lineup from a loss. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineups. Prize Pick. It's good to be right. All right. Briefly, I wanted to talk about the Timberwolves' third quarter woes, and I just wanted to give the stat real quick and a couple of quick examples. So it's been really apparent in the last couple of losses. Obviously, the Wolves-Knicks game was horrific in the third quarter. The Nets and Hornets games were fine against bad teams. The Lakers game was bad in the third quarter. The Nuggets game was bad in the third quarter. Overall this season, Minnesota is 24th in the NBA in third quarter differential. They're a minus 2.4 in the third quarter. Now, last year, they were a little better than that. Last year, they were actually a plus in the third quarter. And when it all broke down, actually, I've got last year's in front of me too. Minnesota was the 8th best team in the third quarter last year. This year, they are 24th in the NBA, minus 2.4. But third quarters and losses has been dramatically worse than third quarters and wins. And sometimes that sort of a stat drives me nuts because, obviously they lost. But they were good in the first half in these games that they lost, right? Like the Denver game, remember Minnesota had a big second quarter and they were up, I think, 8 at halftime. Minnesota lost that third quarter by 16. They gave up 45 third quarter points to the Nuggets. The Lakers game, Minnesota was only down 6 at halftime, but they were -7 in the third quarter. They gave up 35 third quarter points to the Lakers. The Knicks game, Minnesota was up by, I think, 6 or 4 at halftime. They were a -12 in the third quarter, gave up 40 points in the third quarter. So all three of those games, they gave up at least 35 third quarter points. And the first Lakers game, Minnesota also gave up a 40 burger in the third quarter, was a -9. And that's a game they were down at halftime. They're only down like 5. So in their 4 losses this season, they've given up 40 or more points in the third quarter 3 times. And the other time they gave up 35. That's crazy. Now, in their wins, it's a different story. They beat the Nets and the Hornets, of course. They beat a depleted Pacers team barely without Anthony Edwards as well. And then they beat the Blazers, who are actually, I think, better than people think they are. And actually, they have been to this point, results-wise, too. And they lost that third quarter, too, by the way. They were -3, but it was at least close. Portland, of course, is 5-3 and just came back to beat the Thunder the other day. So, like, Portland, I don't know. When it's all said and done, I think they're on the bubble for the play-in. But I guess the second point here is Minnesota has not beaten a good team yet. On the plus side, they haven't lost to a bad team other than a depleted Lakers team. Like, the Knicks are good, the Nuggets are good, and the Lakers with Luka isn't a bad loss either, even though the way they lost wasn't great. So we could talk all we want about, like, man, the Wolves haven't beaten a good team, but outside of a 1-point loss to a depleted Lakers team, which, like, Austin Reeves is a good player, obviously still disappointing. I'm not, no Ant, but also no LeBron, no Luka, the whole thing. And I know they dressed only 8 guys in that game. They haven't beaten a good team, but they haven't lost to a bad team other than that Lakers loss when Austin Reeves went off. So they've been exactly what you'd think a 4-4 team would be to this point. And obviously, we've got higher expectations for this Timberwolves team this year. And they're in a tough spot if we want to talk about just like what we're going to say about them over the next 2 weeks, because they go Utah, Sacramento, Denver's tough, then Dallas, Washington, Phoenix, Sacramento. So, like, the next 9 games, they should go 7-2, if not 8-1, if they are the team that we think they are, and they stay relatively healthy in the whole thing. Going into the Oklahoma City game on Thanksgiving Eve, I mean, there's a real chance that this team is, call it 12-5 or 11-6. Like, that's on the table. Really, they should be. It's not just on the table. That's what the expectation should be. And yes, at that point, we'll look at this and they'll probably lose to OKC by 20 on Thanksgiving Eve. And everyone will be like, well, they can't beat a good team. Yeah, but they have to beat the bad teams too, right? You got to beat the bad teams, and then you got to be competitive against the good teams. And the Wolves should be a good team themselves. And this is where we would then start to learn a little bit more about this Timberwolves team. So I think we got to try and be fair about it. Now, Wolves Jazz tonight. No Walker Kessler. Unfortunately, he's out for the season with the torn labrum. Other than him and Georges Niang being out, it's a relatively healthy Jazz team. They've been a bottom 10 offense, bottom 10 defense. They don't play fast. The Jazz are not a good 3-point shooting team. They're 29th in the league in percentage outside the arc. They do get to the line a lot, which, a lot of that is Lauri Markkanen, who's been fantastic. Keontae George has gotten to the line a ton too. Without Walker Kessler, that number probably dips a little bit. Also, the offensive rebounding. They're a phenomenal offensive rebounding team, but it's almost entirely Walker Kessler. So without him, it's Jusuf Nurkic, who then inevitably he's the starting big, the starting 5. But outside of Nurkic, like, Lauri Markkanen's an okay offensive rebounder. Those are the guys. So the free throw rate is still going to stay high for them, but the offensive rebound rate will dip a bit. They'll turn the ball over a bunch, undoubtedly. Markkanen's a really good player. He actually doesn't turn it over that much. It's more Keontae George is to blame in terms of guys who have the ball in their hands and turn over. Nurkic actually as well. So I guess my keys for this game, once again, and I beat this drum really hard before the Knicks game. It's defensive rebounding. It's defensive rebounding. It's defensive rebounding. I mean, they probably still lose to the Knicks if they grab a few more rebounds, but remember all those stats, and I tweeted them out on X, like Gobert had the same number of defensive rebounds, Gobert had the same number of total rebounds that Mitchell Robinson had offensive rebounds. The Timberwolves had like the same number of total rebounds that the Knicks had offensive rebounds. Like, all those stats are crazy. They probably don't get blown out if they at least rebound a little better. They probably lose, but they don't get blown out. If they don't defensive rebound in this game against the Jazz, they will lose to the Jazz. The Jazz just beat the Celtics, so I know aren't great, but like, they beat the Celtics on the road. Like, they're 3-5. They're going to be competitive. Lauri Markkanen is a 50+ point game. He's averaging 30 a game. So my keys are be physical with marketing. Free throw rate for the Wolves defense has been an issue, but they were not physical against the Knicks, and the Knicks barely got to the line. I think they had 11 or 12 free throw attempts. I don't care if marketing gets to the line. Just don't let him get wherever he wants. The Jazz, like Keontae George has scored a lot, but it's been inefficient. He's turned the ball over a lot. He gets the line a lot. So, like, do your best to not foul when it comes to Keontae George. Let him shoot threes, but be a little more physical with marketing. I think make his life a little tougher. Defensive glass is the number one most important thing, bar none. And they should be okay if they do those things. Even the perimeter defense, like it's really just Keontae George. No one else scares you from a perimeter perspective. Like Ace Bailey, of course, exciting rookie, hasn't done much yet, only is playing 18 points a game. There's no one else that's going to beat you off the dribble besides Keontae George. It's just otherwise it's a bunch of bigs, which again is where the guarding the defensive glass, the offensive glass for the Jazz comes into play. The Wolves offense shouldn't have any problems. Just mentioning this here at the end, the Wolves are currently on cleaning the glass, a bottom 5 offense. Nope. A bottom 5 defense and a top 5 offense. And what does that equal? That equals a very middle of the pack team. And the Wolves are what? 4-4. How crazy is that? A bottom 5 defense and a top 5 offense. And not, this team's identity last year, it got a little, they ended up with a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. But remember, 2 years ago, they were the best defense in the league. And it's effectively the same roster as it was 2 years ago. Well, that's not true. I guess 2 years ago, they didn't have Randle or DiVincenzo. But last year, they were the 6th best defensive team in the league. And now look. So it's an effort thing more than anything else. And I think DiVincenzo said this in an interview the other day, but we'll see what that looks like. The effort needs to be there. This is the first game of the NBA Cup for whatever that's worth. So look forward to that tonight. There will be a live postcast on Locked On Wolves on YouTube. And of course, that audio will find this feed. So the next episode in your feed on audio and on YouTube will be the postcast with Luke and Jack. So be sure to check that out. I will be back on Monday. We'll talk about I guess that will be the post-game pod following the Sacramento game. So I will not do a pod post-Jazz. That'll just be Luke and Jack tonight, so check it out. I'll be back late Sunday, very late Sunday, probably into very early Monday morning, talking Wolves-Kings following that game on Sunday night. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. A reminder that for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show with our guy, Josh Lloyd. He'll give you daily tips. He'll help you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just like this show, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.